What if I told you that abandoning Stoicism could doom your relationship in just 30 days? Stoicism isn't just about personal resilience, it's the glue that holds relationships together through tough times. Today, we'll explore how letting go of Stoic principles can slowly but surely unravel even the strongest bonds. Stoicism, with its emphasis on emotional control, self-awareness, and empathy, is more than a philosophy for individual growth. It's a practical tool for fostering understanding, patience, and harmony in relationships. By staying rooted in its principles, partners can navigate challenges with clarity and mutual respect. This video aims to show how neglecting Stoicism, reacting impulsively, blaming others, ignoring gratitude, can erode a relationship over time. In just 1 month, the cracks of misunderstanding and emotional imbalance can grow into an unbridgeable divide, leaving love and trust behind. Week 1. The first cracks. Chris and Jamie's relationship had always been steady, but the past week brought new pressures. Chris had a looming work deadline, and Jamie was juggling personal commitments. Small challenges began to crop up: missed messages, forgotten chores, and unmet expectations. One evening, Chris came home frustrated from work. A simple question from Jamie, "Did you pick up the groceries?" felt like a demand to Chris, who snapped, "Why don't you do it for once?" Jamie, taken aback, responded with equal frustration, "You're always too busy to care about anything else." The Stoic principle of emotional regulation and pausing before reacting was absent. Neither Chris nor Jamie took a moment to reflect on their emotions or the impact of their words. Instead, their reactions were impulsive and driven by stress. What could have been a small, solvable moment escalated into a heated argument. Chris felt unappreciated for their efforts at work, while Jamie felt undervalued in the relationship. The underlying issues were left unaddressed, and the evening ended with both partners retreating into silence. By failing to reflect and communicate calmly, the first cracks appeared in their connection. Misunderstandings and emotional distance began to grow, setting the stage for deeper conflicts in the weeks ahead. Week 2. Resentment takes root. By the second week, the unresolved tensions between Chris and Jamie began to fester. Each conflict seemed to build on the last, with no effort to address the root causes. The cracks from the previous week widened, and resentment quietly took hold. Chris, feeling overwhelmed by ongoing work stress, began pointing fingers. "You're always so difficult," they snapped during an argument over something as minor as the laundry. Jamie, hurt by the criticism, fired back, "You never appreciate what I do around here. I'm tired of picking up the slack." Instead of taking responsibility for their actions and reflecting on their own roles in the tension, both partners fell into the trap of blaming each other. Chris and Jamie focused solely on external circumstances, each other's perceived faults, rather than practicing internal control over their reactions. The Stoic principle of owning one's actions, emphasized by thinkers like Epictetus, was entirely neglected. Epictetus reminds us, "It is not what happens to you, but how you react to it that matters." Yet Chris and Jamie allowed their reactions to dominate, turning simple disagreements into a growing blame game. This dynamic created a toxic feedback loop. Each argument ended with unresolved frustration, and the words spoken in anger lingered in their minds. Even during calm moments, both partners replayed past conflicts, fueling a narrative of being misunderstood and unappreciated. The impact was evident in their interactions. Communication became curt and transactional, stripped of warmth. Small issues, forgotten chores, mismatched schedules began to feel insurmountable, as they symbolized deeper grievances. The emotional connection that had once been their strength was now overshadowed by a growing sense of bitterness. By refusing to take ownership of their actions and emotions, Chris and Jamie allowed resentment to take root. The longer they avoided accountability and self-reflection, the deeper the divide became, threatening to undermine the very foundation of their relationship. Week 3. Emotional disconnect. By the third week, the unspoken tension between Chris and Jamie had reached a tipping point. The once open lines of communication were now clogged with frustration and unmet expectations. Each partner felt emotionally drained, and the effort to connect began to feel like a chore. Chris, still burdened by work stress, grew impatient with Jamie's attempts to express their feelings. One evening, as Jamie tried to discuss their growing concerns, Chris cut them off with, "You're overreacting. Why make everything such a big deal?" Jamie, stung by the dismissal, withdrew. "Why bother talking if you don't listen?" they muttered before leaving the room. The Stoic principle of empathy and compassion, cornerstones of building understanding, was abandoned. Marcus Aurelius reminds us to be tolerant with others and strict with yourself. Yet neither Chris nor Jamie practiced tolerance or kindness. Instead of seeing Jamie's concerns as valid, Chris dismissed them. Instead of seeking to understand Chris's pressures, Jamie retreated into silence. Days passed, and their emotional disconnect deepened. Conversations were reduced to logistical matters. Did you pick up groceries? Or what time is your meeting? Lacking any warmth or intimacy. The bond that had once thrived on shared dreams and mutual support now felt cold and transactional. In private moments, both partners felt the weight of loneliness. Chris began to resent Jamie for what they perceived as constant criticism, while Jamie felt increasingly invisible, as if their emotions no longer mattered. Neither voiced these feelings, fearing they would lead to yet another conflict. The absence of empathy led to emotional neglect, where each partner felt undervalued and misunderstood. Chris viewed Jamie's withdrawal as indifference, while Jamie interpreted Chris's impatience as a lack of care. This vicious cycle of misinterpretation and avoidance created an invisible wall between them. By failing to practice compassion and tolerance, Chris and Jamie allowed their relationship to grow colder. The emotional distance they both felt was a direct result of neglecting the Stoic virtues that could have bridged the gap. Instead, their silence became a deafening reminder of the love they were losing. Week 4, the breaking point. By the fourth week, the tension that had been simmering for weeks finally boiled over. It began with a trivial disagreement: who forgot to take out the trash. What should have been a simple conversation quickly spiraled into a heated argument as Chris and Jamie's unresolved frustrations came pouring out. "This is just like you," Chris snapped, their voice dripping with anger. "You never follow through with anything. It's always me holding things together." Jamie, already worn down by weeks of emotional strain, fired back. "Are you serious? You act like I'm the problem, but you're the one who's been distant and impossible to talk to." In that moment, both partners abandoned any semblance of rational perspective. The Stoic principle of focusing on what is within one's control, a guiding lesson from Epictetus, was nowhere to be found. Instead of reflecting on their own behavior, both Chris and Jamie dredged up past mistakes and unmet expectations, weaponizing them in the heat of the moment. Chris's anger escalated as they shifted all blame onto Jamie. "You're the reason this relationship is falling apart. If you cared at all, you'd actually try for once." Jamie, overwhelmed by the accusation, retaliated with words meant to wound. "Maybe I don't try because you make everything impossible. Do you even hear yourself?" The argument became a vicious cycle of attack and counterattack, with neither partner willing to pause and reflect. Both were so focused on external circumstances, each other's perceived failures, that they ignored the power they had to change their reactions in the present moment. By the time the shouting subsided, Chris and Jamie sat in stunned silence. The weight of the argument left them both emotionally drained, their frustration now mixed with hopelessness. In their minds, they replayed the harsh words exchanged, each more painful than the last. This moment marked the breaking point. What should have been an opportunity for calm reflection and reconciliation became a glaring reminder of how far they had drifted from their values and each other. By abandoning Stoic principles like emotional control and rational thought, Chris and Jamie made reconciliation nearly impossible. The damage done in that one argument seemed insurmountable, leaving both to wonder if there was anything left worth saving. What went wrong? As Chris and Jamie look back on the past month, the cracks in their relationship become painfully clear, each rooted in the abandonment of Stoic principles. In week 1, the habit of reacting impulsively without reflection sowed the seeds of discord. Minor disagreements escalated unnecessarily, creating tension that could have been avoided with a pause for rational thought. By week 2, the failure to take responsibility deepened the divide. Blame replaced accountability, with each partner pointing fingers instead of reflecting on their own actions. This shift created an environment of defensiveness and resentment. In week 3, empathy and understanding were neglected. Dismissive attitudes and emotional withdrawal eroded the trust and intimacy that once formed the foundation of their connection. Finally, in week 4, the loss of focus on what could be controlled sealed their fate. Both partners allowed frustration and past grievances to dominate their reactions, ignoring the Stoic teaching to focus on their own behavior rather than external factors. The key insight is clear. These non-Stoic choices didn't just happen, they compounded over time. Each failure built upon the last, creating a toxic cycle of blame, resentment, and emotional disconnect. For Chris and Jamie, and for anyone seeking to nurture love, the path forward is a return to Stoic virtues, self-awareness, emotional regulation, and mutual respect. Only then can relationships truly thrive. Reclaiming Stoicism to save love. The key to healing lies in returning to the Stoic principles Chris and Jamie abandoned. By pausing before reacting, emotional escalation can be avoided, creating space for thoughtful and respectful communication. Taking responsibility for actions, rather than assigning blame, rebuilds trust and accountability. Practicing empathy allows for emotional reconnection, reminding both partners of their shared humanity and love. Most importantly, focusing on what can be controlled, their own mindsets, responses, and efforts, empowers them to mend the relationship from within, regardless of external circumstances. For those watching, the message is clear. Reflect on your own behavior and identify areas where Stoicism can help improve your relationships. Ask yourself, are you reacting impulsively, neglecting empathy, shifting blame? Letting go of Stoicism doesn't just impact your peace of mind, it affects the people you care about most. By embracing its principles, you can create a love that endures.